I don't need a record company anymore for obvious reasons. I mean, it's because of the new electronic availability. I mean, there's no necessity for a record company.
Merle Haggard, the country music legend, died 9 years ago on April 6, 2016, and left a legacy of immortality with his music and a life marked by hardships and success. Ever since his demise, his fans have been speculating regarding different facets of his life, especially his prolonged fight against illness and what he revealed in his later years. Now, Haggard's wife, Teresa and Lane, has finally confirmed some long rumors and speculations about the man behind the music. Haggard, with his outlaw image and as a voice of working-class America, was candid about his checkered past, including prison time and drug addiction. A telling affirmation from Teresa is Haggard's consciousness of mortality. It was no secret that he had struggled with pneumonia for several years, and in the period immediately preceding his passing, he informed his family that he knew he would not survive beyond his birthday. In a chilling irony, Haggard died on his 79th birthday, as he had anticipated. One of the biggest rumors that followed his life was his strong feeling of remorse and introspection in his later years. What was the truth behind the rumors? How did this news change her life and the image of her late husband? Let's get into the inside story and read the untold story of Merle Haggard. Life prior to fame. The childhood of Merle Haggard was molded by the hardships of his parents, Flossie Ma and James Francis Haggard, who were among the immigrants of the Dust Bowl crop-top military wave migrating to California for better prospects during the Great Depression. Born in Chakota, Oklahoma, the Haggard family was motivated to make their way to California by a horrific incident. They set their barn on fire in 1934. This tragedy, combined with the general economic hardship of the era, encouraged the family to abandon their Oklahoma heritage and make their way west, along with thousands of other Okies seeking stability and employment. The Haggards first moved to Bakersfield, a city that would eventually find its focus in the Bakersfield sound of country music, a genre that Merle Haggard would later reflect. James Francis Haggard took work with the Santa Fe Railroad, giving the family a degree of financial stability. Their accommodations were modest, though. They shared a small apartment until they could find a more permanent residence. The course of the family's life turned in a fascinating direction when a local woman who had a boxcar in the neighboring town of Oildale came to James with a strange offer. She asked him if he could refit the boxcar as a habitable residence. In a display of resourcefulness that came from necessity, James rehabbed the boxcar, making it a simple but comfortable home. This boxcar home was the residence of the Haggards, and there, on April 6, 1937, Merle Ronald Haggard was born. The Oildale boxcar home was not just a home. It was an emblem of the strength and perseverance of the Haggard family. James' resourcefulness enabled them not just to establish themselves in California, but to create a life there. The land came to be added to over time. A bathroom, another bedroom, a kitchen, and a breakfast nook were built on an adjacent lot, enhancing the living standards of the family. Such a piecemeal addition to their home reflected the slow but continuous growth of the Haggards as they struggled toward a better way of life. The loss of Merle Haggard's father in 1946 came as a crushing blow for the young boy, something that would have a lasting influence on the rest of his life. Haggard was only 9 when James Francis Haggard passed away suddenly from a brain hemorrhage, an event which had a profound impact on him. James had been a steady presence in Merle's life, a stabilizing influence and role model in a world of economic instability and turmoil of the Dust Bowl years. His loss created a void in the family and pushed them into hard times. After James Haggard died, the family's financial situation became even more unstable. In order to keep the family going, Flossie Ma Haggard became a bookkeeper. The job was stressful and time-consuming, and Flossie's daytime absence left young Merle to his own devices more than a wayward boy would want. The loss of a father, combined with the stresses of existing without intense supervision, drove Merle down a dark road in his early years. One of the defining incidents in Merle Haggard's childhood was when his older brother, Lowell, presented him with a guitar at age 12. The guitar served as an important release for the sadness and bewilderment Merle experienced following his father's death. Merle was mostly self-taught, teaching himself to play by playing along with records at home. The sounds that spoke to him were from country greats such as Bob Wills, Lefty Frizzell, and Hank Williams. Their music and narratives profoundly impacted the young Haggard and foreshadowed the sound he would eventually create. Without formal training, Haggard's capacity to teach himself proved both his natural ability and his tenacity. Even though he discovered music, Haggard's life quickly spiraled downhill after his father's death. He got into trouble with authority, school, and discipline. When his mother worked long hours and was away from home, Merle began to misbehave and get into delinquent acts that continued to get worse. His mother, desperate to try to straighten him out, sent him to a weekend at the juvenile detention center. She hoped the experience would frighten him into reform. Alas, this temporary stint didn't do the trick. Rather, it appeared to embolden him even further, instilling a rebellious nature that would define much of his early years. By the age of 13, Haggard's criminal activities became more refined. He was stealing, forging checks, and leaning toward a life on society's periphery. Lacking a steady father presence, and with his mother frequently working, he was pulled into mischief with limited guidance or oversight. This was the start of a life pattern of run-ins with law enforcement that would ultimately cost him a stint in San Quentin prison, a chapter of his life that would come later to dominate the telling of it and music legacy. In 1950, when he was 13 years old, Merle Haggard's defiance of authority and willfulness put him in more serious trouble. Arrested for shoplifting, Haggard was committed to a juvenile detention facility, a continuation of the cycle of delinquency that had begun after his father's death 4 years before. This was the start of a string of brushes with the law that would shape much of his adolescence and early adulthood. Still, even this did little to temper his way. Haggard's existence was more and more marked by restlessness and an innate hunger for freedom that frequently expressed itself as homelessness and crime. In 1951, a year later, Haggard, along with his friend Bob Teague, decided to flee their stressful surroundings by eloping to Texas. Their escapade was symptomatic of Haggard's desire to break free in the wide open spaces, a motif that would later dominate his recordings. The two young men jumped freight trains and hitchhiked the state, exercising a carefree existence that was short-lived but liberating. They were in effect vagabonds, a modus operandi that would later inform Haggard's iconic songs about life on the move and the life of the working man. Later, Haggard and Teague went back to California, but their return was not without difficulty. They were being blamed for a robbery that they did not commit and were later arrested. It was a bitter experience to remind them of the injustice of life on the periphery of society, as they were jailed for a crime for which they were innocent. It wasn't until the actual perpetrators were apprehended that the boys were let go. Although he had this experience, Haggard was not derailed and did not show any remorse. The incident did not discourage him from his course of disobedience, but rather served to solidify his defiance. Later in the same year, Haggard found himself once again in a juvenile home. This time, he and Teague broke out of the institution and traveled to Modesto, California. In Modesto, Haggard held a succession of menial jobs to make ends meet, such as driving a potato truck, being a short-order cook, pitching hay, and even serving as an oil well shooter, a dangerous job that involved blasting explosives in order to enhance the amount of oil that flowed from wells. These physically strenuous and frequently poorly paid jobs